Hello, and welcome to Security Art's Anatomy of an APT presentation, where we will be discussing the phases of APT according to a successful spear phishing campaign we have conducted on a client of ours. First, a little bit about us. Security Art is an internationally recognized cybersecurity consulting firm, a group of innovative thinkers which utilizes unique technologies developed worldwide. Our advanced services include red team exercises, which entail APT and penetration testing, along with DDoS mitigation testing, as well as incident response. APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat, is the long process of utilizing the human element to successfully bypass an organization's security measures. It is essentially the art of hacking people. We start off with recon and intel gathering. In a spear phishing campaign, we ask ourselves what are the specific web applications or environments we want access credentials to. We then proceed with intel gathering. We obtain email addresses, obtain signatures, letterheads, actual emails that contain a person's writing style, and maybe some personal information so that we can fully replicate the person. First step we take is to find all the administrative entry points available on the target network. In this particular case, we found numerous administrative panels pertaining to this organization, like this backend VMware, Jira, cPanel, KubeCart. For this exercise, we chose to engage the client using the KubeCart panel, as it was most likely to have the most substantial amount of administrative users. We also obtained emails from employees within the organization to learn writing patterns and obtain signatures that we would later use for our phishing emails. Once we chose the application we want to use, we moved on to the next step. We set up the attack infrastructure. In this case, we fully replicated the page's look and feel, behavior, and error messages. We then spoofed the delivery of the page. We type squatted a very similar domain name. We replicated the full URL and query structure, and we obtained SSL so that we may look as reliable as possible. We also added harvesting functionality, which logs the input of the user and submits it to the actual page to follow through with a full login process and completely misguide them regarding the fact that they have just been phished. This is the original live site from the client. And this is the fake one we made. We have type squatted the URL with an M instead of an N, so that if it had been Client Networks, it would have been renamed Client Metworks for similarity's sake. The two were identical in look and function. Both were fully SSL supportive, and both used the exact same URL, except in our site, an N was replaced with an M in the domain name. A quick glance and the average user would not notice the difference. In addition, we added Beef, browser exploitation framework, to run in the background. Beef is a JavaScript shell that sits in a user's browser and makes a connection back to a command and control. This allows an attacker to run some rudimentary tasks on the target system, such as turn on a webcam, copy target's clipboard, or in some cases using the connection as a tunnel to further attack the internal resources. Once the infrastructure is set up, we can move on to execute a phishing campaign. We can use the information gathered to lure our targets into visiting our webpage. We can also open lines of communication with targets, if possible. This was the email we sent out. The simplicity of the email actually lends a lot to its credibility. And within 5 minutes of sending out our malicious email, 2 administrative users clicked our malicious link and submitted valid credentials. One of them was the client's CTO. Once we obtain valid administrative credentials, it's time to see how far they reach. We expand our influence by exploring the access and authority these credentials grant us, and we attempt to elevate our privilege inside the system. We also look for other login credentials while we're in there. A real attacker would also check for password reuse throughout the organization's networks. In this case, the credentials worked just about everywhere, including the CTO's Skype. This particular organization utilizes Skype exclusively between employees and customers. By gaining access to the CTO's Skype account, we essentially become him and can quickly abuse the trust this account holds. Within the second application we were able to get into, we discovered that we could forward the entire inbox from one of the administrative email accounts. While going through the emails we forwarded, additional administrative credentials to their Google admin account in cPanel were obtained. The original credentials we got from the CTO also worked to access their intranet, where we found credentials and documentation on how to access their internal VPN. Someone was even nice enough to upload a file containing new passwords to databases. And of course, more credentials and more credentials. Now that we have credentials with access to practically anywhere, it's time to spread our infection. We use any previously obtained access and authority, and a seemingly highly reliable email to spread malware within the organization. We use any successful breaches of company assets to host and spread more malware. There were numerous methods we could have taken to spread our infection. We could have entrenched ourselves within the applications we had access to and monitored the organization. Or we could have used any of the numerous email accounts we now had access to in order to abuse trust and further our influence. But what we decided to do was obtain a list of all internal email addresses, which is something we could not get from an external resource like Google. We then went back to our malicious server and sent out an email with a malicious link to all employees within the organization, which would download and run our malware. This email contains a link to a supposed Windows hotfix attached to a forged email by the CTO. Within the first 5 minutes, we got 4 users to download and run our malware, infiltrating their machines, the numerous domains they are on, and furthered our influence into the organization. With our malware, we could watch them as they browse the web, as they check their emails, or we could simply watch them with their own cameras. This gentleman was actually speaking to the IT administrator about our email at the time we captured this image. These were some of the responses we got from the users we sent our malicious email to. First was from another IT administrator who was quick to realize the email was fake. Some people just flat out refused to follow the instructions in the email. Others were quick to see where we changed the N to an M in the URL and played the joke back on us. In your dreams. Nice try, M. Finally, some couldn't install our malware as they didn't have permissions on their systems. This opens a line of communication that we could take advantage of. Now that we have additional footholds in the network, we will continue to expand our influence. We apply the previous expanding techniques. We tighten our grip on the infected machine by installing additional malware through the original malware, and we exploit other devices on the network using the infected machine as a beachhead. With access to the internal network through our malware, we can now gain access to internal resources and apply passwords we found from previous stages. These include root access on numerous systems within the network. In addition, we found firewall configuration files, internal IP maps, and of course, additional password files, which can be seen near the bottom of this list. This gave us access to the Citrix vSphere client, which hosts production servers. After we have access to every part of the organization's internal network, we begin the final phase of the campaign. This includes an exfiltration of sensitive data, demonstrating our influence over the devices in the network, and elevating our privilege as far as possible using all current hooks into the victim organization. This is just a taste of the data we were able to exfiltrate. Sensitive shipping and sales information, password to numerous email accounts throughout the organization, SQL dumps, and even SSL certificates along with their root keys for their domains. At this point, an attacker would continue to burrow into the network, set up listening posts, and exfiltrate additional sensitive information over time. This was an example of the complete compromise of an external and internal corporate network from a single slip-up by an administrator. Within a short time, every part of their network was compromised by an external attacker. Regardless of the noise we made on our way in, though, and even with their knowledge of our meddling, once inside, it would be almost impossible to remove this infection. Thanks for tuning in.